Following a contentious night of debate, early this morning, the Texas House passed sweeping immigration legislation. But not until after tempers flared. Democrats accused an East Texas lawmaker of trying to end debate on a bill that would empower law enforcement to apprehend, arrest, or send back people who cross the border illegally. With bleary eyes, Speaker Dade Phelan gavelled the Texas House out of session around 4 this morning, after lawmakers approved 3 bills dealing with immigration.
You're my friend, man.
All these cowards.
But this hurts.
The bill that drew the biggest debate and resulted in this interaction was House Bill 4, which would create a new state crime for those illegally crossing the border, authorizing state police to arrest offenders and order their return to Mexico. First-time offenders could be punished by up to 180 days in jail, while repeat offenders would face up to 2 years in prison.
This hurts.
This video shows State Rep Armando Wall confronting Representative Cody Harris of Palestine after Harris made a motion to block new amendments, accused by Democrats of trying to end debate.
Yeah, there's, I think, 46 amendments that have already been filed, and so I would imagine that there's plenty of opportunity to have the full debate on this bill with that many amendments.
When have we actually done that on a bill to, in essence, cut off debate? Because that seems like appears that's the net effect of what's happened.
Wall would later confront Harris during a break on the House floor.
Y'all don't understand the y'all do hurts our community. It hurts us personally, bro.
Could you just let us?
It hurts us.
Just let us debate it.
It hurts us to our core. And y'all don't understand that. Y'all don't live in our skin.
And while Wall acknowledged he knew the bill was going to be passed by the House's Republican majority, he did not appreciate Harris trying to silence them.
We know where the bill's going.
Yeah, we know.
Let us debate what we need to debate. Let us blow some steam.
Now, we did reach out to Representative Harris today, who accused Democrats of stalling by filing nearly 50 amendments. He told us in part, while Democrats argue that this motion was an attempt to shut down debate over the bill, that simply is not true. My motion prevailed, and we went on to debate the bill and their amendments until 4 in the morning when the House passed HB 4. Now, Harris went on to say the Texas House is a deliberative body, and the important topic of border security deserves a full and robust discussion among policymakers, and that's exactly what it got.